I was really lucky to have had like a really high growth experience at my last company. The next stage or like the next frontier really was trying to create that high growth environment myself. No customer tells you, build me this. They come to you and they're like, this is everything that's shit. And why don't you go figure out how to solve it for me?
Yeah.
I flew from London actually.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, well, I went home and I showered and everything, but
Yeah.
we did a team offsite.
Wow. Where did you go?
We went to Lisbon.
No way.
Yeah, it was fun. It was our first like full team offsite.
Really?
It was super fun. Yeah.
Wow. Elliot, the editors, grew up in Portugal, so
Okay.
he's going to be very happy with. Assuming that you liked Lisbon.
Yeah, it was. What a beautiful city.
Yeah.
It also reminds me of San Francisco because it's got that bridge.
Yeah.
It's apparently designed by the same guy who did the Bay Bridge.
Really?
Chris Purcell, I think is his name. Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah, and it's got the water. I mean, the food is so good and cheap. It's got kind of the city feels very welcoming. Also, it's become quite popular for tech companies to do offsites there because there's now a non-stop flight from San Francisco to Lisbon.
Really?
TAP Portugal flies a non-stop flight. So
wow. Yeah. Okay, maybe first question is like offsites, right? How do we do a good offsite?
You know, I think my view on offsites is that you should just get everyone in the same place, like create a super fun collaborative atmosphere. Not try to do like too many events, like, have the nice dinner, have like a couple of team building activities or like whatever special to the place you're in, but just give people time to like be together, and then you see the ideas start to flow and people get excited. And so we did Lisbon because it's beautiful, it's sunny, it was like good midway point between San Francisco and London. And everyone was there, and by like day 2 or 3, everyone was just vibing together, right? Like, you wake up, you do breakfast together, you sit down, laptops come out, people start talking ideas, hacking on things. Some people present the stuff they're working on. And then usually like in the evenings, we would do some kind of activity, like at least walk around the city, go to dinner. We did like a food tour of the city, which was super fun in like tuk-tuks.
Yeah.
They were like kind of dangerous.
Wow.
And so it became a little bit of a bonding moment for everyone.
Yeah, because they got like the streets are like got the
cobblestone. Yeah. So we were bouncing around and it was really funny.
And what kind of food did you get in Portugal?
Yeah, so we had like a local tour guide who showed us all the local Portuguese food, and a lot of restaurants like you wouldn't usually go to as a tourist. And all of them were basically for us. Right?
Yeah.
So that was really nice. Local wine, local drink. Definitely felt like a little nice experience with everyone, to go do that. I think we will all remember it for a long time. And so, just, we're mostly in-person team, but we have some remote folks. So this is just really helpful for everyone to feel like very together, very much a team. I've been doing this for 2 years now, so like it's long enough where I think these things really start to matter.
Yeah, and how many people are you guys right now?
We're now 17.
Okay, so you don't necessarily rent out a whole hotel, but you're just in the same...
Yeah, we're like, 17 rooms in a hotel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's fun. We all stay in the same hotel.
Yeah, okay. And actually, did someone else in the team organize it, or were the founders like booking everything?
Well, we were frantically booking stuff, but we did have a friend who helps do operations for us at the company, do a lot of it. And I would highly recommend like making sure you're not on the hook to deal with every single thing: hotels, activities, food. But it ended up coming together.
Yeah. Okay. That's...
There was like some dysfunction too, but a little bit of dysfunction was necessary to like
a nice bit of dysfunction.
Yeah. Like we went to this VR arcade and nothing worked. And like I think we're all gonna remember that.
Okay.
That
was
thing.
Actually a highlight.
Yeah, it was a highlight. Yeah, where like we all put on our VR goggles, started walking around, and kept crashing, and people started running into each other. So it was a little fun little dysfunctional experience. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's very cool.
Okay, quick announcement. WorkOS are hosting a one-day conference dedicated to enterprise software. It's called the Enterprise Ready Conf, and it's taking place on October 30th in San Francisco. they have got the founder and CEO of Vanta, Christina, speaking, as well as the head of product for ChatGPT. Yes, ChatGPT, Brit. So if you've got questions for them, go along. And they've got the founder of WorkOS, of course, Michael Greenwich, who's been on the show twice, and you know how much he knows about enterprise software. So if you're kind of thinking about, selling enterprise software, or you already do it, you should definitely check out this conference. Go to enterprise-ready.com or click the link in the show notes.
I should say, hi everyone, you're listening to Scaling DevTools. I'm joined today by Sagar from Speakeasy, which is, actually, I know you do a lot of stuff, but one of the things you do is SDK generation. But do you want to talk a bit more about the other stuff that you do as well?
Yeah, totally. Hi everyone too. My name's Sagar, CEO of Speakeasy. As Jack said, we do SDKs, but kind of our vision is really to help teams build, test, and run their APIs. We started with SDKs because it's a kind of a core developer experience problem that a lot of us have either felt or have dealt with in the past, and have realized immense amounts of value we can help companies deliver by helping them ship these amazing interfaces. But yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so I first came across you through one of your incredible teammates, Nolan in London. Shout out Nolan. And so I know I've seen the story for quite a while, but I'd love to kind of hear like how you got started in the early days with Speakeasy.
Totally, yeah. Definitely shout out to Nolan. He was first employee at the company, so he's really helped us build Speakeasy to where it is today. So my co-founder Simon and I, we got started with the company in 2022. We spent like almost 8 months, almost a year, it felt like, really working this problem from different angles. And interestingly, the shape of what we've done over the last 2 years has changed, and we've had like at least one pretty big pivot, but the overall vision has always somewhat been the same, which is the API development lifecycle is actually quite cumbersome for teams that are trying to move fast and ship high quality APIs. There are a lot of I would say V0 or Gen 0 tools in the space that have worked really well for really big enterprises, kind of top-down engineering styles of work. But in today's world where you have microservices, teams shipping their own APIs, you have also team shipping APIs on the edge. You have LLMs, function calling. They're both the API producers and the consumers have a really interesting place today. There's many more things an API producer has to worry about. The number of languages, the runtimes, the ways that the APIs get consumed. And consumers are basically, most consumers are left with a 3-pane API doc site. Right, and they get that that's best in class for a lot of companies, and they get that, and they're told, okay, go integrate with the API. But the truth is that is just discoverability. That's not actually integration. Integration is when you actually pull that thing as a dependency into your app, into your product. And so we realized there's all this last mile tooling that is missing for an API consumer to have that amazing Stripe quality experience or any great API you've used like GitHub or Twilio. You get all this great tooling as a consumer. And so all you're focused on is just building. You're not worrying about versioning, deprecated fields, how to actually go from the API endpoint to, actually writing the code in different languages.
Yeah.
So that broad vision of helping this ecosystem function better has always been our focus. But yeah, that's where we got started. We, the previous company I worked at, we actually built a whole API platform around this, and it was a really massive effort. It was 12 developers for a year going after this, and we saw a similar thing in a lot of other big companies.
12 developers for a year.
Yeah, and then I think steady stated to 4 later on.
That's a lot.
But it was a lot, yeah.
So that's probably over $1 million of steady state cost.
Probably
plus
more. The lunches we did
at the beginning.
But no, it's a really big cost for teams.
Yeah.
And it's also not a well-defined cost either.
Yeah. That's very interesting. When you first like kind of had like you were like, this is a big problem. What was it like? Did you just like immediately quit your job and go try and solve this, or like?
Yeah, I was actually in London at the time. I was living
Shout
there.
out London.
Shout out London. And it was still pretty deep in COVID. And so I was kind of hacking away at this problem from different angles for a while. And then I met Simon and I ended up moving back to San Francisco. And even before I quit my job, I think it was like 3 months before I quit. And then once I quit, it was another 8 or 9 months before we actually became a real company. I think it really speaks to how, important those early days are when you're like exploring and you're figuring out a lot of things. You're figuring out like the space you want to work on. You're figuring out if you're the right person to be working on this. There's kind of fit in both ways. And I think it just takes time to figure that out. Like you need to kind of stew in the problem space for like days and weeks till, until you finally build up enough conviction that you want to spend the next X years on this thing.
Yeah, and what those like kind of first 3 months and then 8 months, what did that like look like on a day-to-day basis?
I would say the first 3 months, I was still working a job, so and Simon was as well, and so it was a lot of us actually talking to potential users, potential customers one day about the problems that they have in their development lifecycle at their company, and not just API development, like almost more broadly.
Yeah,
we would just try to find team leads and pretty like senior developers at companies and talk to them about what were the most painful points in the way that they ran their products, their teams, and then over time kind of narrowed the scope to API development, and then once we had like a little bit of conviction, started hacking out POCs, putting things out there for people to try, and it also became pretty clear to us at that point, like this is a problem that a lot of developers face, but it's one that really is magnified at scale. So at like medium to large companies is where this has a pretty big impact. And so, there's always this like struggle as a startup. Do you go after enterprise? Do you go after startups? Do you go in the middle? And we realized we were going to have to be very kind of thoughtful about what stage of company we were going to find. And so we actually spent a lot of time like kind of figuring out who are the perfect targets for us to work with. That's what it was. It was a mix of like a lot of user discovery, customer discovery, definitely some POC building, putting it out there for people to try. I remember the first customer that tried our POC, the customer today, but it wasn't that product. Like they churned off of that thing and we had to come back with a completely different product. Those like ups and downs early on is just how you learn and navigate the space.
Yeah, and so was it like a kind of a process of you had someone, you built something for them, you gave it to them, like
exactly. Yeah. The moment we found someone who was like ready to, who was hungry enough for a solution, we just built something and we gave it to them. It wasn't great. It kind of worked.
Were they paying for the first versions?
They were not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In retrospect, we should have probably asked them to. That would have probably built a little bit more like accountability. But they were not. Yeah.
Okay. But you felt like this is an important problem for them. They're willing to. Yeah.
And I think the way we realized it was an important problem for them, like the whole API development lifecycle, was they had a pretty senior engineer over there who was tasked with figuring this out.
Okay.
And so even if we didn't exist, that person was going to have to either build it themselves, look for vendors. Like there was someone who already had like a KPI around this.
And was that the person that was the champion, or was it their boss?
That person was the champion, but they had a boss too.
Okay.
So there was like an economic buyer and there was a more on the ground champion.
Yeah. That makes sense. And how did you meet your first kind of people? Was it just
goodwill of other founders and this amazing ecosystem we have here? I'm very thankful for that. Like I think you always need an in. You need some trust building that happens early on.
Yeah.
I think it can be a little different, when you're doing like an open source product and you put it out there on Hacker News and there's more organic build. But when you're building, I think, like an enterprise product, or even something that's like SMB, you still need companies of relative scale to like believe in you, which means there is a little bit of like relationship based introductions that you need. And so like I've just a good founder friend introduced us to this company, and then it took off from there. So a lot of luck, a lot of appreciation for that. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess you were always, from day one, you were kind of, you said you were thinking about whether you go enterprise or whether you go like startup. It sounded like you did narrow in on bigger teams. Or
Yeah, slightly bigger teams, like, companies that are at least 50, 100 and above. Was
like
where
engineers or total company?
total.
Okay.
And over time, that's become more an engineering thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not to say like, I don't think what we do is valuable for startups. I think it is. We have a lot of great startup customers who have pushed us really fast, actually. But just in terms of like how we as a company can grow and expand a product, it's become clear it's a more SMB and enterprise play.
And do you think that because you were kind of going after like teams, that it was different to some of the like kind of classic developer tools, like, I don't know, like conventional wisdom of like, complete PLG or whatever?
Yeah, it's a good question. Early on, I was like, oh my God, are we going against conventional wisdom? Like, are we doing the wrong thing? But then I think we realized later that like going PLG and being super developer friendly isn't at odds with what we wanted to do. We've fully adopted that now, and like everything we do is PLG. Everything is obviously self-service. Everything is developer-led, but how you choose like what products to prioritize and build is a little bit more driven by the market and like where you position yourself. So I would say it's kind of almost a false dichotomy is where I've landed, is that they're two different axes. Like one is about how to build a good product, and the other one is more about your ICP, right? And who are you building for your public roadmap, right? Like, who is that optimized for?
Yeah, and so in the sense, if you're to discover who you're building for, could you say that part again? Actually, like about like trying to make sure I understood. So
like conventional wisdom, I think we hear a lot in the Valley is like you're either PLG or enterprise, right? And I think those are actually two different axes. Like you can be PLG and be enterprise as a product. I think, to me, PLG is more just about how you set your product up for success, right? And how you set your company and team up for success, where the growth of the product is driving decisions, and it's all self-service. It's all driven through like customer interactions. And the enterprise side is really a question of like who your ICP is. Like you could be PLG and selling to startups. You could be PLG and selling to enterprise. What we found is the largest enterprises we work with, they still come inbound and like naturally discover the product and use it PLG, and then talk to us when they get to like a certain amount of usage. So I think you could be PLG and enterprise is what we've learned.
And so, but it's useful to like figure out who to like target it to by going like directly and having these conversations.
Exactly. I think, you could be building a PLG product, you could be putting it out on Hacker News, open source, but I think you still want to be talking to companies of different sizes and like forming an opinion over time of where is the willingness to pay, right? Is it like a fast-moving startup that has high willingness to pay for a product, or is it a bigger company with like organizational problems it's trying to solve? I think so. You still have to like build a conviction of where in the market you're focusing, separate of separate of being PLG itself.
That makes sense. And then in your experience, have you found that there's a big difference between what the enterprises want and the startups want?
Day zero, no. For our product, luckily, it's the same. But the day 2 and 3 starts to differ. And I think that's where, to your earlier question, like that's where you just start making decisions of like where you're going to focus your time in the market. For us, because we're kind of this multi-product platform, or at least that's what we're building towards, our day zero product of coming to Speakeasy and launching an SDK is useful for a startup or an enterprise. But then the things we do after that, as we grow, are going to probably be more or less useful for companies of different sizes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know that you did South Park Commons, which we've been talking a lot about recently,
Sure,
just
yeah.
because we had Colin as well. Well, what stage did you do South Park Commons?
Yeah, we were there when Simon and I were just ideating, doing proof of concept. So it was that like -1 to 0 phase. I would say we had a general sense of the space, but we hadn't narrowed in on the problem that we were trying to solve. We hadn't narrowed in on product or ICP or anything like that. Yeah.
Okay, so that was like even before you quit your job, or was it like?
It was like right as I quit my job. It was when I joined South Park. Yeah.
And did you raise money from them immediately, or was that?
We did not, but that is an option for people to do. Yeah. We ended up being part of South Park for many months before we did our pre-seed.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I know you told me, but that was a good experience for you.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing community. I think what I really like about South Park is most of the folks who are there have had a few experiences already. Like they've been part of a high growth startup, or they've tried to do their own thing and now like trying to do it again. And so I would say brings folks who are a little bit older, I think, on average, than say the traditional YC community.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying one's better or worse, but I think for me, I found this was a really good fit.
Yeah.
Because I was in a similar place. I think it's also it's a small group. It's very high quality folks. It's a diverse group of people. I think when we were there, I think only about 50% of folks actually go through and found. The other 50% end up joining companies.
Really?
Like we even had, I think, one person our year do a nonprofit. One person became a professor or something like that. And the point is they really do emphasize that like -1 to 0. And so if you're doing -1 to 0, when you get to 0, the outcome may not be founding a company.
Yes.
And so that's, I think, great, because you should definitely not found a company unless you're like truly sure that is what you want.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously a big undertaking.
Yeah. Why did you know it was what you wanted to do?
That's a tough one. I think, I've gone back and like tried to ask myself this. I think now where I am today, and like I don't know how it could be anything else. Like I find it hard to find the reasons or justify it.
Yeah.
But I think in the moment, what I realized was I was really lucky to have had like a really high growth experience at my last company, LiveRamp. And the next stage, or like the next frontier, really was trying to create that high growth environment myself. And I think something about like navigating a problem space and working with customers, trying to like, you almost have to like figure out what they want.
Yeah.
When you're founding, like no customer tells you build me this. They just kind of dump a bunch of problems to you. Like it's kind of therapy, right? They come to you and they're like, this is everything that's shit, and why don't you go figure out how to solve it for me?
Yeah.
And I found that really exciting, right?
Yeah.
There's other parts of company building I really enjoy, like recruiting and team building is something that's just like I love doing, and I try to do really well. So yeah, I think you have to want to do all the things, right?
Yes.
I think it can be hard when you join a startup, even if it's doing super well. Like generally, you do have to have a focus area, but as a founder, you get to focus on 10 things at once. And that's just super exhilarating.
Yeah, that's that's very interesting to hear. And do you remember when you got your first paying customer?
I do, yeah. I remember it exactly.
Could you tell us about that?
Yeah. I think it was like the day before Thanksgiving or something that we got it.
Okay. And that would have been, Thanksgiving is...
This would be 2022, November 2022.
November 2022. Yeah. And you started like...
at the end of 2021.
Okay.
So like
so
November,
like
December,
roughly
a year. Yeah. And there was a year of like ideating and changing directions, and we finally did our pre-seed in the summer of 2022. So this was like a few months after the pre-seed.
Yeah.
We did have a bunch of users and design partners already, but we didn't have like a true company paying us serious money. Yeah, I mean, it was a really exciting experience. We had been talking with this customer for like, I would say a few weeks. And the reason we really, I think it worked was we realized we were not just like building them an SDK, right? What they wanted was they were about to launch an enterprise API for the first time. And so they wanted a partner that was going to kind of follow them in that journey. And when you're launching an enterprise API, today you might need an SDK. Tomorrow you might need like a product that helps with authentication, and then you need rate limiting, and you need all the things around an API. And so we realized we could learn a lot from them. And for them, we were this kind of expert on call, right? Even though we don't do all those things for them, we're able to like help them navigate the space. So yeah, that was why we started working with them.
That's really cool. I think there's like a lot of startups that seem to kind of do that at the beginning, where it's like you're, to some extent, like at the early stages, like if it's a complex product, it's like hard for it to be like fully there in such a short space of time. And I know like some startups like kind of almost selling themselves as like, we
consulting services. Yeah. I think it's very underrated, especially in dev tools, because there's a lot of conventional wisdom on PLG, right? And I think the PLG wisdom can sometimes like come across as like, don't do consulting, right?
Yeah.
Don't do pro services, like have the product built and let everyone self-service. But the truth is, I think if you're trying to work with good sized companies, they want the confidence of like getting a partner in you, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it comes down to doing some amount of consulting service. And I actually think it's great because it puts you like front and center with the company, and they feel like, they get a product and also a contractor within you. And I think any of us who have been contractors or worked with contractors, like it's a very like intimate relationship, right? Like you're on Zoom calls with them, you're like kind of part of stand-ups. So in that sense, being really stuck in is actually nice.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just ship a product, you kind of just have to wait for them to see what happens. Or you dig into logs and you're like, what are they doing on this thing? But if you're consulting, then you're actually helping them solve problems.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know this beforehand, but it kind of, for us, it just happened. And I look back at it, I'm like, I think we're very lucky to have taken that approach and not tried to like productize too quickly. Instead, like play that consulting role for many months before we really, harden the product. I think our first like 5 or 6 customers, there was a lot of what people would call pro services, right? Where there was a product, of course you could go log in and do all the things, but to really get to the value they wanted, like we would jump in on Slack and like help them through it, right? Especially in our world of APIs, like a lot of the focus for these companies is around the API spec, right? It's this kind of sacred artifact that you need to get right, and all these things in your organization can be driven off of it if done correctly. And so for those companies, we were this expert that told them how to write a good open API spec, and how to like design this interface that then becomes core to the documentation, their SDKs, the auth, the gateway. And so they got confidence in us. They had confidence to like go forth and do this thing because we were right there with them.
Yeah, that's actually really, really interesting, isn't it? Because it's like they're saying we want this thing, which kind of becomes your product roadmap, and then even like the way you reassure them, or like the fact that you're telling them how to do open API specs. It's almost like that's then your content strategy about like.
Yeah, and this is why actually Nolan, who we've given a shout out to already, was our first employee, and he runs developer relations. So we hired him even before we had a founding engineer, technically, because as you said, like all that consulting work we're doing became content on API development. And that I think actually brings most of our leads today.
That's really, really cool. Yeah, that seems like actually like a very underlooked thing to do. Would you have any advice for someone that is doing that, like the kind of do's and don'ts? Because it seems like one of those things that like could be absolutely glorious, but like could also just like drag you into this like tar pit of like ongoing work.
Absolutely agree. I think it's a fine line, right? Because you go too far down the consulting route and like you haven't invested in building a repeatable product.
Yeah.
What I would say to people doing it, maybe time myself looking back, is definitely don't shy away from running great support early on. Because one way to think about it is like not pro services or consulting but it's just that you have an immature product and you're going to have to run support, and the support is going to be a lot more than you do support for like a mature product, where you're not just like solving issues, you're actually kind of building at the same time. But I would say that's okay. I think something not to shy away from, just be conscious of obviously like the choices you're making in the product, making sure it's repeatable, making sure you have more than one customer at a time using it. Like if you can get a small cohort, like 3 to 4, when you're really early in onboarding, like that does help. Because then at least, you have a small cohort of customers and you're not building for 1, you're building for 3, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what you're trying to make sure of. But once you get to that number 3, 4, 5, 10, then you have some repeatability.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess like even 2 people wanting the same thing is probably like the odds of that
Minimum
being
threshold.
is like the odds of that being useful to more people is like really high compared to just one person wanting it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that ways to kind of secure that. I mean, in dev tools, I think we're very lucky because there's a lot of like open protocols and standards you can kind of align yourself with, or like pre-existing prior art that people build off of. Like, if you're in streaming, you're probably thinking about Kafka and like building off of that, right? Or for us in REST APIs, you're thinking about Open API and you're like building off of that. And so there's like pre-existing ecosystems, and as long as you stay close to that, like I think you can find users in those ecosystems who will be willing to try your product, because you're not asking them to like adopt something new. You're actually just making their life better around what they have. So I think in DevTools in particular, like I think we do have most spaces do have a way to do that.
Yeah. And one of the questions I had like in that is like, if you build something specifically for like, a cohort of customers, does it end up becoming sometimes where the product is like something very different for this cohort compared to like the kind of like main trunk of the product as it progresses? Or is that something that you've actively managed to avoid?
We've definitely had challenges there. I think you also have to remember, even with the earliest customers, like they're buying your product, but they're also buying your roadmap. So you should definitely, where possible, lean on your roadmap, right? I think when you're early and you're like worried about everything, you're like, is this customer going to churn? Are they unhappy? I think you deliver value and then you ask them, right? Like, what if we put this on the roadmap for 3 months from now? And it's funny because at startups, like 3 months feels like a really long time.
Yeah.
But then a lot of the companies you're working with, 3 months is actually a very reasonable timeline. I think to me, even as I said, 3 months feels really long. Yeah, but like you can imagine
Totally.
Some of this would never get done. So 3 months is actually totally doable.
Yeah. I mean, even like, I definitely know teams that's totally fine.
Even a month, right?
Yeah.
Like that's, for us, it feels long.
Yeah.
But if you can guarantee it for someone, that's actually like good certainty to have.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And then it's going to be something that's actually like usable for other people. And
and they know, and you can sell them on that. Look, it's going to be more sustainable.
Yeah.
That we won't end up as a startup. Every adopter worries about like, is this going to disappear?
Yes.
And so if you can, push your roadmap based on the fact that of like, hey, we're going to have 10 more people use it, it's going to be better for you too. Then I think a lot of people are actually quite understanding.
Yeah. That makes really actually, that is a really good point. Okay. And then so how, like, I guess you carried on doing this kind of like, you're doing this almost like prosumer stuff. did it, I guess at some point it like kind of that starts to fade away and you have like a clearer like self-serve stuff or
Yeah, I think like 3 or 4 months after that, we were at a point where it was like self-serve. We had people coming on board and using it. And then I think by then our content strategy had to kick in a little bit. And so we were getting some decent hits off of things like OpenAPI tips, right? Like how to do X in OpenAPI.
Yeah.
It's still like highest ranked articles.
Really?
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah. And it's just stuff we learned along the way working with customers. We just turned into content. Yeah, and so we definitely switched to a lot more self-service PLG. We had at that point like a good sense of like what our first product was. This managed SDK product became a lot more hardened, and then it became more about like prioritizing the next feature, right? And so that's a little bit more easy to work with. Yeah, I think what really helped us like do that transition, honestly, was the content and the like DevRel strategy, because that brought in a lot of eyeballs, and when you have more eyeballs and more users, then you kind of you have this like distribution of users, and then you start to see where the mode is of usage, and you start to make an opinion for yourself of, okay, this is what like the center of this market looks like, or this is what like 90% of my future users are going to look like. And so it becomes more a game of like data, right? You have just more data points. Yeah, so I think it took a few months after that, but we got there.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then so after this, so you have like people coming like self-serve, they're using it, you're getting content. After that, is it kind of just, do everything but more, or was there another like phase?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, through this too, there's like a bunch of team building stuff you're doing as well. Like you realize at some point, it's not just you and like 2 other people can't handle this. You have to bring on amazing people to work with you. I think the next big thing was like figuring out how you could expand the product.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of like you don't want to expand too quickly, because you do want to build a high quality focused product, especially in dev tools. Like our user base cares about quality, rightfully so, right? Like we're asking people to take a risk of building on us. So I think there was a period of like polish and hardening and just like a nice DX and UX, filling it out, right? Filling out the product with all the things you want. Like we invested quite a bit of time in like just a custom doc site, because we were like, we want really nice docs. And so I remember there was like a month where we were just like tooling our own Nextra doc site, right? And we used this awesome tool called CodeHike, which like helped us do scrolly code stuff. So yeah, just like making sure the entire company experience was good for customers. So the docs, the customer support. We invested in support tooling in Slack so we could like respond really quickly. We invested in also just like our GitHub services, our CLI, our GitHub Action, like making sure these things were like
really
nice, and our core customer base was happy and was growing, and doing that has helped us like then get time back to focus on the next product or like the next growth path for the company. So yeah, I would say that phase was pretty long, because there's, I think for us there was multiple axes of growth. There was features, there was languages too. Like we're kind of this polyglot product. We work across 7 languages, so there's also like the design decisions we had to make to like enable that too. Took some time. We got it wrong, and then we got it wrong again.
Yeah, that's pretty.
And then we finally, I think, have found something that works. Yeah.
Yeah, and so have you had to have that expertise within the team in terms of like 7 different languages?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I would say by no means are we experts in all 7. I would say we have a lot of folks who have worked in like different languages, but also different languages in like enterprise settings. So like they know what it means to ship like really high quality code in Java or C# or Go or Python. But I think we've realized early on we couldn't go it alone. So we ended up like reaching out and building relationships with some of the best developers in these spaces, like Colin from Zod and TypeScript, right?
Wow.
Like he's been just an invaluable resource for us. So the Pydantic team in Python,
Yeah.
we spent a lot of time with them, figuring out best practices, helping like understand where they're taking the ecosystem. So I would say we have good expertise in-house today, but I think like Speakeasy as a company is actually Speakeasy and friends, right? It's like
Interesting.
us and everyone we interact with, we sponsor, we find ways of like taking their learnings and bringing it in.
Yeah.
And I truly do hope over time, like we're able to find those great influencers and be beneficial to them in some way, but they're also super helpful to us in pushing our product forward.
Yeah, actually, on Colin from Zod, because I've used Zod, it's great.
It's amazing.
Yeah. And yeah, could you talk a bit about what it was like working with like any of the benefits or like, you know, how you work with Colin from Zod?
Yeah. First of all, he's amazing. Just like what he's built with Zod is, I think, just vaulted the TypeScript community forward, which is amazing.
Yeah, actually, if anyone doesn't know what Zod is, maybe we should like schema validation.
Yeah.
Let's put it.
Really simple way that I think about it is, like you go to the site, it says schema data validation library for TypeScript. I think about it as the thing in your TypeScript code that ensures you're not passing the wrong data around, right? Like, is a string actually a string? Is an integer actually an integer? Is a union of two types? Are you going to handle those two types correctly? It gives you all that great type safety. And it does it in a library that's like super great to work with. Has great integrations with things like OpenAPI and other frameworks. So with Colin, the way we worked was so the history for us is we actually put out a TypeScript product, a TypeScript generation product for SDKs, and we were not using Zod. And because of that, we didn't have runtime validation in the SDKs, and we were missing a lot of the things that we felt like a best-in-class SDK could have. And so we rebuilt it, and this time, instead of trying to like build our own validation library, we put Zod in. And Colin's been amazing in terms of just also helping us understand, not just support, but understand like where Zod is going. Because by adopting it, we're also kind of saying we're investing in Zod for the long term. We're also making that choice for all our future users, right? And so we wanted to be really sure about that. It's been amazing working with him, just his support, insight into the roadmap, and also, just I think being there for us whenever we have questions and like, deep design discussions. He's been super helpful. And same is true for honestly, all the influencers we work with. I think that the dev community is so lucky to have these people who are so passionate about what they do. They're willing to give you their time.
Yeah, actually on influencers, I feel like it can be sometimes it's like very hard to know I guess that is basically the question is like when you work with someone who's an influencer, and I feel like with Colin it's like kind of more of a gray area where it's like it's also like an expert.
He's too humble to call himself an influencer.
I mean, like how do you kind of assess like if this is a good thing to invest in, good relationship to invest in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it feels similar to hiring in many ways, in that we try to work with the person for several weeks in some capacity, where, obviously their time is super valuable too, so we kind of treat it as a paid contracting engagement of maybe they help us solve an issue in the library that we use, or they help us write a blog post, or they help like review code decisions for the language that they're an expert in. So I think making sure there is like a concrete, task that you collaborate on helps you understand like, are you going to get along with this person? Do they kind of share the same, values around like what you're doing? So I'd say that's the case. I'd also say you kind of know in that it's similar to hiring, right? Where like once you start working with someone and there's this amazing chemistry of working together and great understanding and respect and collaboration, then it becomes obvious. Yeah, and I think the space we work in, like there's high mission alignment.
Yeah.
It can be very obvious. Like we started work with the Pydantic team a few months ago, and just super high alignment in like what they're trying to achieve and what we're trying to do. We're excited and glad to be pushing Pydantic forward.
Yeah.
Of like promoting it with our customers while they push it forward as a library. And so there's just like a very mutually beneficial relationship there.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I feel like the way, like, I think you said the word influencer, but it's almost like what you're describing is like, when I think of influencer, it's like I'm thinking of, someone that makes like,
videos and content.
Yeah, like very much like
yeah.
kind of like big personality to like do like a shout out or something, or like build a project with your tool.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's more like these are the kind of like leading people within the industry of like the that you're doing. I mean, like for Zod, it's like if you're validating, the data coming into your request is correct, like that probably is Zod. And if Colin were to like talk about, people would take his opinion very seriously on these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And you also would not expect that he would ever endorse something that was like not, great, basically.
Yeah.
It seems like it's kind of a much more like subtle, expert-driven approach to kind of influencers in a sense.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah, I think the maybe the side or the flavor of influencer that's more interesting to me is like these folks who have done the 10,000 hours, or honestly done the fucking 10 million hours, right? And like so much depth of knowledge, and that they have like true taste in this space.
Yeah.
And the libraries they're working on are often open source, and they just become the kind of key decision makers that push a space forward, right? And so like they're like truly influencing in that they're making decisions for everyone.
Yeah.
And like we all trust their decisions almost implicitly.
Yeah.
Because their work is so core to what we do, what everyone uses. So those are the kind of influencers we try to work with.
Yeah. And it kind of, I guess it almost feels silly to ask you, like, you're not like looking at spreadsheets and saying, okay, we invested this. Here's how many leads we got from like this relationship.
I'm sure that's there somewhere in our product analytics stack, but I think that's not the only way to measure the value. I would say that's like one part of it, and maybe a little bit more downstream or like later on in the relationship. When you're doing like an open source sponsorship and you're trying to justify the spend. But I think the relationship really starts with much more of the like, is this mutually beneficial? And then also, is this person the right person to follow down this? Because they're taking you down a path on all the decisions they're going to make. Yeah. You're kind of following that. So there's a lot of thought that goes into like, is this the right thing for our users, our ecosystem? And I wouldn't say I don't think I have a great rubric. I think it's a lot of like working on the problem, talking with them, seeing what the other options are, and like really making a call. Like this is the right person to put your time and investment in.
Yeah. No, to me though, it sounds like really smart way to do it, and that like it makes so much sense. It's like you're kind of investing in people that can help make your product better. Yeah. The people that are genuinely the leading lights in the space.
Absolutely.
That it seems like so obvious that whatever you're spending on this relationship is like,
it's a lot more
going to pay off in the long run.
Absolutely. There's has been so many great influencers. We've been super lucky to work with so many great ones. Another influencer comes to mind, Dave Shanley. He's a amazing Golang developer who has built these like just beautiful and super fast Golang libraries to parse and work with OpenAPI. He also does some amazingly fun content to watch, but like those libraries are amazing. And just watching him respond to GitHub issues and be so attentive was amazing, right? And those kind of things, like I think, are also the kind of folks you want to like align yourself with, because I think our whole industry is built around open source and not just open source, but like the goodwill of some just truly amazing developers.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, just been tons of amazing people we worked with.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's really, really cool. And I think that's the sort of like influencer marketing that developers want to see, where
Yeah,
it's like,
Totally.
yeah. That's very, very cool. So you've been doing content that people that you found your clients were interested in, and you picked up the tips and things you learned. You're working with people like Colin. Are there any other ways that you're kind of driving growth with Speakeasy?
Yeah, good question. I think, integrations, obviously. We have great partners in the ecosystem. The API space has like kind of adjacent to us, for example, documentation vendors.
Like Mentalify.
Mentalify, of course. The Scalar team, also a great product. There's like, our space is definitely seeing a bit of like a resurgence, I think. Lots of interesting stuff going on.
Yeah.
I think another really interesting one, content for us, has been something we like to call like engineering as marketing, where, all the engineering design decisions we make, the things that we talk about internally, some of it gets turned out into blog content. And it turns out a lot of other people are thinking about the same stuff. So I'll give you an example. Like, we recently did a lot of upgrades to our Python generation, and there was a big debate around like data classes versus Pydantic, and two pretty like key libraries in the space on like how to manage your schemas and validate data. That's a blog article on our site, and it's based off of like internal conversations, other things we read, and that's getting a lot of hits, right?
Really?
Because like, I'm sure a lot of other teams, when they start the Python stacks and products, are thinking of the same thing, right? Like, how do you choose between the two?
What title did you go for?
Oh, that one was probably a little bit more SEO driven. Like, I think it was like getting started in Python, data classes versus Pydantic. Like, that was like a very key. I think I chose something sillier, and then someone on my marketing team was like,
we actually need an SEO
yeah,
title.
you just have a good SEO title. Everything else can be like perfect copy of like what you actually talked about, but like the title has to be SEO.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, no, I've appreciated there are like, I think, low hanging fruit that you can fix to like have good SEO.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I'd also say another thing, honestly, I'm sure other startup founders will say the same thing, but just making your early customers happy, and making them like really happy, and trying to be there for them all the time. Like, I always try to make sure when the customer messages us, like, we message back like in a minute, right?
Really?
Like a minute or 2 minutes. And even if we don't solve the problem, sometimes it takes us more time, but just like, I want them to know that we are there for them, right? Like, we're not going to leave them hanging, whatever
That's really
happens. And so like, I think that kind of trust you build up, like, people talk about it, right? And I'm grateful that our customers have spoken on our behalf, but I think, just investing time with them, they will go and speak on your behalf for you.
That's really cool.
And I don't mean just like retweets and LinkedIn posts, which are also awesome. I love that too.
Do it.
Yeah, please do it. You know who you are. You do a great job with it. But also like the word of mouth. Especially when you're early and you're selling to like a lot of companies of the same size here in the Valley, in the tech world. Like, it's actually a pretty small world of people who talk, right?
True. True. Yeah. Very small world.
Very small world, indeed.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think we're probably at about time.
Okay.
Is there anything that you really wanted to kind of like, you would want to tell like DevTools founders from your experience?
Yeah, good question. I think as DevTools founders, like a lot of us are developers or have been developers in a past life, and I think we all trust our gut and our instinct. I think that's absolutely fantastic. But I would say, like, don't forget to also hear your customers and like hear what they say. I think as developers, it's easy for us to like say, oh, I have an intuition around something.
Yeah.
And I think that's true, but you're building for the 99% developer, not the 1% developer.
Yeah.
And eventually you're going to have to start selling to like developers outside the Valley and outside Hacker News, and the developers at Fortune 500s who, have very different kind of day-to-day experiences. And so, I think you definitely like have to back your intuition up with a very wide range of like other developer perspectives.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And where can people learn more about Speakeasy and about Sagar?
We actually just launched a new site, so speakeasy.com. Paid a nice bit of money for that domain.
Nice.
Yes. So learn about it there. We have a Slack community too. All of us at the company are always there, ready to chat with you about stuff.
Amazing.
Always happy to talk about it.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for joining. And thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back again soon.
Thanks everyone. Cool. Thanks, Jeff.